Yeah, so 2023, maybe into 2024, the 9,000 one. But I do think by year end, it's very possible we could see 12 to 13, or at least double bottom at 15.7.
What would take Bitcoin then?
That's going to be risk. It's going to be risk adjustment, meaning that de-risking in the system. Bitcoin is going through this crazy period where people are just gambling on these coins. And I've said this before, but I've never seen
other coins.
Yeah, on the other coins. But it's all the psychology of it, right? It's when people feel like they can gamble and they can just sell it to someone else higher, and they know deep down there's no utility. That is not a sign of a bottom in a market, like a Bitcoin bull market. It's the sign of a top. And so now if you expand that out and say, okay, Bitcoin is still a risk asset. Well, what if the stock market does start to tumble? Where does Bitcoin go? And that's my thesis, is that we will hit a recession. The market doesn't think that the Fed won't come to the rescue. The market and investors are conditioned for now 10, 15 years. Every time there's a hiccup, the Fed prints money. I don't think they do it this time. And that is going to be a shock. It's going to revalue the stock market 20, 30% lower from here. And that will take Bitcoin back down.
In the sense of it's a fully unstable environment. It's dragging down everything.
The parents have said, you get out of the house, you're on your own now, to Bitcoin. Well, that's the Fed saying that to Bitcoin, right? I mean, it now has to stand on its own. There's no more money printing, at least for now.
The Fed never really helps Bitcoin, that's for sure, not directly, but the Fed has stepped to help the market.
Right, and it's the printing of money that ultimately helps Bitcoin.
So you really think Powell is going to hold steady, continue to channel his inner Paul Volcker? Okay.
I think...
What's the support line? I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think that the Fed intends, like in their mind, they're like, we have to be hard about this. We can't let it get away from us. And I think they'll try to hold out. But just like always, eventually the Fed will print. But we're talking about them holding out to such a level where the market doesn't expect this. Because again, look at 2018. We had the Fed begin to raise rates. The market dropped 20% in like 6 weeks. And the Fed started instantly to reverse.
And that's what the markets have come to.
That's what they expect.
The tantrums have yielded results.
But that was when inflation was under 2%. Right. So now this is the key, and the market doesn't realize that yet.
So what support line are you looking for Bitcoin to break to confirm your 12 to 13 target?
Yeah, so on our way down, there's a huge level around 23 to 24,000. If that breaks, you're headed to the 15,700 level, which is your double bottom. And then if that breaks, your next stopping point would be 12 to 13. So I'm very much a trader in that I look at the levels on the charts. And if one level breaks, if support breaks, the likely target is your next support line.
And if 12 breaks, 9?
Yeah, and to me, 9 is a very intriguing number because the 10,000 will be max pain. And the markets, there's something about the markets and the psychology of the markets that it makes it so that the market wants to flush the most people out possible. And to me, where would that be? If you ever saw Bitcoin break 10, people would finally panic and throw up. Everyone says, oh, I'd buy 1 million, Bitcoin or whatever. That's nonsense. Panic would set in, and that's usually where bottoms are made.
But you're a long-term believer in Bitcoin, so you would be buying.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And again, I'm such a contrarian that I want to see, like, I start buying when panic. They say blood in the streets. That's the term.
Yeah.
When you see that, that's when you step up. Vice versa, when you see the gambling that's going on right now and the crazy moves in some of the stocks and cryptos, that's where I start to nibble on the short side.
Be fearful when others are greedy. Be greedy when others are fearful. Always like to quote the Oracle of Omaha on that one, Warren Buffett. So, and even in the blood of the street scenario, that's where you think gold comes in as the traditional safe haven store of value, and hence you have the 2,300 gold prediction for 20.
Correct, yeah.
What about silver? Silver's had a bit of a pullback.
Mm-hmm. Silver's pulled back quite a bit more than gold. In a weird way, that makes sense because it's also industrial, right? So you have silver where if we do head towards a recession, silver won't be as in demand, and so that portion is helping it pull back more. I still am long-term bullish on silver, very long-term bullish on gold, but that's why silver has pulled back. I think it's starting to get actually interesting to nibble on down here.
Let's talk about short-term again, because you're saying that the fact that Bitcoin has pulled back from that 30,000 to 500 high that it's reached in this trading cycle is an indication that the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ may be rallying upward?
Well, so this is the kicker, right? Is that we are seeing the Nasdaq rally and the S&P rally right now. But this is the amazing thing. This is where I get all giddy and excited because, yeah. So if you look historically, and this is what I do, right? It's looking historically at charts. When we topped out in 2021, Bitcoin topped out in November, right? 6 weeks later, the S&P and the Nasdaq topped out. If you go back to 2017, we topped out in December in Bitcoin, and about 4 to 6 weeks later, we topped out on the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq. And so what you're looking at here is, in my opinion, the Nasdaq and S&P are rallying, but you're seeing that greed come in where I think in just the last week, Nvidia is up like 10, 15%, right? It's getting close to all-time highs. That to me is the final push up. And ultimately, we're now at 4 weeks since Bitcoin topped. And so the idea is within 4 to 6 weeks, the S&P and Nasdaq should top, and now you're going to look for a flush.
Top previous all-time highs, or just top?
No, just in this cycle. Just like Bitcoin.
Okay.
Bitcoin didn't get back to all times. It just got to 30,500. But same thing here. We should start to see the next leg down, both in crypto, which has started, the S&P 4 to 6 weeks later, which is right now to the next 2 weeks.
So Bitcoin is a leading indicator, if you will, for movement for the S&P 500 and Nasdaq?
Absolutely. And it is an indicator, and I'll tell you why, is because people de-risk. When they start to get nervous, they sell their riskiest positions first, which is crypto, then the next riskiest stocks, and then it goes down the chain. So it makes a lot of sense why Bitcoin would be a leader for telling us that the S&P would top out.
Okay, well, again, at the Bitcoin conference, we talked about this, that we're seeing less attendance than usual. Right. What does that tell you about market sentiment? Are you seeing people pulling back from Bitcoin, as you just discussed, and it being translated into slightly lower attendance this year? Well, not slightly, quite a bit of a lower attendance this year than last year. Still, admittedly, they're about 15,000 people at this year?
Yeah, it's still big, and there's no doubt about it. And
30,000 last year?
Yeah, and I think that's twofold. So number one, we know we're still in a bear market in crypto. Number two, I think it speaks to the economy, right? I mean, it's not cheap to come to these conferences. And I think people, you have to pay for the hotel, you have to pay for the flight if you're not in the vicinity, and then you have to pay for the ticket. And so I think it also speaks to an economy where last year people were coming out of COVID, right? They all wanted to take trips anyways. What better place to go than the Bitcoin conference in Miami? Well, now you're past that, and people are having a little bit more trouble with money.
What has been your other takeaway from the conference so far?
I think just for the most part, it's very cool to see all the innovation out there in the booths, and then of course you always see Michael Saylor making speeches and everything like that. So I think for the most part it's bringing together people that have a vision of a future that has less government intervention.
Yeah,
I think that's a very cool way to be, and I think that's one of the great things about these conferences.
Well, certainly the idea of less government intervention has been a big theme at this year's conference. We just heard from presidential candidate Robert Kennedy Jr. who was emphasizing the role of Bitcoin in a free and fair market. A lot of talk about CBDCs at this year's conference, which we didn't have last year. It seems that has sort of permeated the mainstream thinking. Not that Bitcoin necessarily is mainstream thinking, but the fact that we have more and more people talking about CBDCs. Yeah. What's your read on that?
So I think that the CBDC is coming. In fact, I think the Fed is purposely, and the government's purposely withholding regulation so that the CBDC can get its foothold before institutions come in to the crypto markets, right? So we know that right now there's so many institutions that probably want to get into crypto, but there's no regulation. They don't know what the rules are, and they're not going to put hard-earned investor money at risk until they have a firm framework. The government knows that. And the government, just like China did, and this is key, and weirdly enough, we're following the China playbook. China banned Bitcoin, launched its CBDC, the digital yuan, and then is now allowing Bitcoin back in, right? Instead of banning it here, they're just not giving anyone regulation or guidance, making it so hard for companies to operate and so hard for bigger players to get involved until they launch that CBDC. Once that, I would almost bet on it that once that CBDC is launched and has a foothold, all of a sudden magically we'll get the regulation out there.